Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. I've had a frigid week. The Canadian winter has finally arrived. We hit minus 23 degrees Celsius this week, and with wind chill, it felt like minus 30 degrees Celsius. For those of you in the States, that's minus 9 Fahrenheit, and with the wind chill, minus 22 Fahrenheit. Yeah, exactly. It's damn freaking cold here. I have had to keep my 2 cupboard doors under my kitchen sink open 24 hours a day because if I don't, my kitchen pipes freeze. My poor car has been groaning each morning when I go out and try to start her because she is literally an ice cube. Miley is a red tick coonhound, and that breed is usually found more in the southern states or warm weather areas. She is so against this weather that she holds her pee until her eyes are bulging, just so she doesn't have to go out. And when she does, she literally pees as she runs down the steps. And then she turns around and comes right back inside. Piper, on the other hand, loves the snow and the cold. She gets outside and plops her fat ass into a snowbank and just sits there. And when you open the door to bring her back inside, she just ignores you. She just sits there like a big fluffy blob in the snow until you're screaming at her to get in the house. My cat Bentham, who is an absolute dick, has claimed the heat vent in the downstairs bathroom. And he lays on it for most of the day, making sure, of course, that his entire body is covering every single inch of the vent. And since I'm the only girl in the house, when I have to pee, the seat of the toilet is so cold that I feel like I'm peeing on top of Mount freaking Everest. Oh God, I love living in Canada in the winter. Anyways, that's about it from my freezing little corner of Ontario. Let's get the business out of the way. If you enjoy this episode or any other episode, please head over to the Patreon page and give the show some love. For less than a cheap ice scraper, you can help me continue to bring you these episodes each week. The link to the Patreon page will be in the show notes. You can also support the show on Spotify. And don't forget to give the show a 5-star review on Apple, which helps us in the ridiculously difficult to understand algorithm over there. Like, follow, and share the show with everyone you know, and share it with people you don't know. Everyone is welcome here. Well, that's enough of the business. Let's get to this week's case, shall we? The dogs are huddled under some blankets and sleeping behind me, so Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax while I tell you about the case of the Knight family murders. Impulsive psychopaths present a particularly volatile and dangerous threat. Their lack of premeditation and poor impulse control mean that triggers can be unpredictable and escalate rapidly into lethal violence. Unlike calculated killings, these acts often stem from sudden rage, perceived slights, or immediate gratification, making them difficult to foresee or prevent. The disinhibited nature of the impulsive psychopath, coupled with their callous disregard for consequences, frequently results in brutal and excessive violence in the heat of the moment. The case of the Knight family murders is a horrific example of what can happen when a habitual criminal is released into society repeatedly. In a scenario such as this, the only outcome is escalation. As always, I want to give the victims in the case top billing: Meryl, Regina, Karen, and Kenneth, and to all the friends and family of the victims. I acknowledge you, and I send my love to you wherever you may be. I found this case in some old issues of the Rocky Mountain newspaper from the 1950s. So we're going to look at the case a little differently than what we normally do. We're going to meet the victims first, and then we'll look at the criminal himself, and then we'll discuss what happened. Now, because there is hardly any information on this case anywhere, I've had to piece it together with what I could find in the archives of the newspapers. And sadly, like today with press, there was way more information on the perpetrator than the victims. In 1958, 47-year-old Merrill Knight was a prominent attorney in Denver, Colorado. He lived with his 43-year-old wife, Regina, and their two children, 15-year-old Karen and 17-year-old Kenneth. The family lived in an upper-class neighborhood of Greenwood Village. Karen and Kenneth were Merrill's children from a previous marriage to Bernadine Wilson. Bernadine had passed away in 1949 when the children were only 6 and 8. In 1953, Merrill remarried to Regina. At the time of the crime, the entire Knight family were very excited in anticipation for a family vacation that was scheduled to start the day after the crime, on Saturday, April 26th. On the evening of the 25th, the Knight family had been invited to the home of a neighbor's, the Wilson family, for a dinner party. They were all very excited for a wonderful weekend, a dinner party on Friday, and Vegas on Saturday. And sadly, that is pretty much all the information I could find on our victims. However, there was a wealth of information regarding the perpetrator. So let's look at the shit snake, shall we? David Early was born in Salt Lake City on November 14, 1929. His parents were Casper Fannin and Geraldine Fannin Early. Casper was a Navy man, and shortly after Early was born, the couple divorced. In April of 1934, when Early was 5 years old, Geraldine married James Early. James adopted Early and gave him his last name. James Early is a distant cousin of Merrill Knight. In 1943, Geraldine divorced James, and it was just Geraldine and David moving forward. When Geraldine registered David at school, her occupation was listed as nurse, waitress, and grocery store checker at a Piggly Wiggly. So it sounds to me that Geraldine was doing what she had to as a single mother to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. I've never been to a Piggly Wiggly. We don't have them here in Canada, but I would love to go and just see one. Fun fact, Piggly Wiggly was founded in 1916. Apparently, the founder, Clarence Saunders, was traveling on a train and saw some pigs trying to wiggle their way under a fence. And he thought of the rhyme Piggly Wiggly. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I found out when I asked the magic Google box where the name Piggly Wiggly came from. Throughout school, David Early was a discipline problem, but with above average intelligence. His main problem, apparently, was that he hated school. He didn't like all of the people telling him what he had to do. Early made it to junior high, but was expelled. He was then sent to another school, but according to reports, he dropped out shortly after getting there. In 1943, Early was arrested for stealing a bicycle, one of his first encounters with the law. According to the judge in his case, Early expressed himself well and was honest when asked about his offense. The judge asked David Early why he took the bicycle. Early's answer? I just needed it, so I took it. His probation officer stated that Early was a loner, but had a rather pleasing personality. However, David Early was poor and pathetic, as his mother had to work and he had no father. So I guess back then, having no father just made you poor and pathetic? Oh, the 50s. David's life was filled with petty crimes, theft mostly, and each time he was caught, he would freely admit to his crime. In December of 1943, he had run away from home. While he was walking, he entered a gas station to warm up. When the attendant went out to wait on a customer at the pumps, Early helped himself to $5 in nickels. When asked about this crime, his response to the judge was, I needed the money. I just saw it in the cash register, and I saw I could get it when the man went outside. So I took it. According to the judge in that case, Early was being logical. He needed money, saw some, and took it. But his problem was that Early couldn't understand why everyone else had a problem with his actions. In David's mind, he had a problem, and he solved it. And that should have been the end of it. He had zero comprehension of the laws or social norms. In 1945, Early ran away from home again. This time, he went on a 5-day spree of stealing what he needed to survive, and ended his run from the law with a cruise down the Ohio River on a cabin cruiser that he stole. For this crime, he was sentenced to a juvenile detention/reform school for a year. In May of 1946, Early was released and enlisted in the Air Force. He was sent to a base in Texas for training, but his mom, Geraldine, caught wind of where he was and wrote to officials at the base asking that her son be discharged as he was underage. The Air Force granted Geraldine's request, and Early was honorably discharged from the Air Force in February of 1947. But unfortunately for Geraldine, Early had turned 18 while he was in the Air Force, and so in August of 1947, Early enlisted in the Navy. Back then, a lot of young men lied about their age to go to war. You see, when World War II was on, there was a lot of, I don't want to call it propaganda, but it almost was. And there was a lot of advertising saying, be all you can be, and Uncle Sam wants you, and if you're a real man, you join the army and go over and fight Hitler. And so even young 14, 15-year-old men, boys really, were lying about their age to join the Army or Air Force to go overseas and fight. Which, if you think about that now, as a mother, if my 14-year-old son was sent overseas to go fight in a war, I think I would die. I don't know that I would be able to breathe. A lot of the propaganda was aimed also at the parents of these young soldiers. Be proud of the man you've produced. Your son is fighting for his country. We all need to be proud of these boys. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight for our country. Absolutely. It wasn't a child's war. It was an adult war, and it should have been fought by the adults. In a perfect world, wars wouldn't exist. But unfortunately, our world is a little tilted. A little bit more tilted now. But war is not for children. If the adults want to go and blow themselves up, let them. Okay, tangent over. I'm going back. In August of 1947, Early enlisted in the Navy. In April of 1948, Early was arrested in Denver, but he was dealt with by the military police. But I couldn't find any other reference as to what this charge was, only that he was arrested and held for the military police to come and take him back to base to be dealt with. In early December, so just a few months later, Early was dishonorably discharged from the Navy, but no one seems to know the circumstances of that discharge, only that it happened. But from all of this information, we can clearly see that Early wasn't adjusting well to the Navy, and he is already a career criminal. So Early has now been dishonorably discharged from the Navy, and once you get one of those, you aren't going into the Army or the Air Force. So it appears that David Early became kind of a drifter after being bounced from the Navy. In April of 1949, Early was arrested for bouncing a check in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There, he was given a 2-year suspended sentence. Early then decided to return to Denver, and there, on May 30th, so just like a month later, he is arrested and charged with vagrancy and petty theft. He was sentenced to 60 days in county jail for those charges. Once he finished serving the 60 days in Denver, he stole a car and returned to New Mexico. There, he was arrested for violation of the Dyer Act. The Dyer Act is a law that makes it illegal to move a stolen vehicle over state lines. So Early sat in a New Mexico jail until September of 1949, when he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the theft of the car and taking it over state lines. This, at the time, was considered a hefty penalty for the charges. But while Early was waiting for his trial to begin, he had, of course, tried to escape the jail. So the judge had thrown a few extra years onto the car theft sentence to make up for the escape attempts. Early was to serve his sentence in Oklahoma, and while the authorities were transporting him to the Oklahoma prison, he managed to escape custody. This time he was able to stay on the run for a few days, but he was caught again, and a judge added more time to his sentence for the escape attempt, and he decided to send him to a Texas prison this time. But on the way to the Texas prison, Early escaped again. This time, he managed to enjoy a few more days of freedom before he was caught and brought back. So the judge, if I was the judge, I would be so sick of this guy by now. So the judge sent him to a prison in Pennsylvania. Finally, the police were able to get him to the prison. It's almost like Runaway Bride trying to get this guy into a jail cell. Maybe it's not the criminal, but the police that are supposed to be transporting him? I'm just throwing it out there. This dude got out 3 times while he was being transported. Early served his sentence and was paroled on October 21st, 1954, from the Pennsylvania prison. But then, 2 months later, he was arrested on December 10th, 1954, on aggravated burglary. So, from all of these arrests and escapes and arrests, and we can clearly see that this shit snake is a career thief and really has not one single fuck as to what he does. He plays by his own rules and takes what he needs to survive. So after the arrest in 1954 on aggravated burglary charge, the judge ordered Early to undergo a psych evaluation. The results of that evaluation? He was found to be legally sane. However, the doctors that examined Early for that psych evaluation testified that he was a constitutional psychopath, which simply means a psychopath as we know it today, dangerous, without empathy, etc., etc. David Early was in that psychiatric hospital for a month, and then he was released back to the prison in February of 1955. Once the evaluation was presented to the court, Early was then sentenced to 3 to 7 years. And during this sentencing hearing, Early was represented by Richard Schmidt, who just happened to be the law partner of Merrill Knight. Merrill had somehow found out that his cousin's adopted son, that being David Early, was in trouble with the law, and Merrill asked Schmidt to represent David. David Early started his sentence, and according to the warden's report, Early was a good prisoner, working in different sections of the prison and staying out of trouble. 2 years later, on March 11, 1957, Early was released from prison, as he had served his minimum time with no problems. But Early was technically still on parole in Kansas for a petty theft that he had committed previously. So when he was released, he was immediately picked up for parole violation and taken back to a Kansas prison to finish out his sentence there. The lesson learned here? If you're on parole somewhere, don't get picked up on another charge. So the shit rat got out of prison, probably took one big breath of freedom, and then was taken right back into custody. Once he got back to the Kansas prison, he served the remainder of his sentence, and he was then released on April 22nd, 1958. Once out of the Kansas prison, Early made his way back to Denver and checked into the YMCA under a false name. Now, I don't know if Early was pissed that his cousin's lawyer couldn't get him off of the charge and made him go to jail or what, but if I had to guess, knowing the way that Early thought, he most likely figured he needed money to live, and he knew that Merrill was a successful attorney and that there would be money somewhere in his house. And that is why he made his way to the Knight family home on April 25th, 1958. It was logical. He needs money. There is money. I'm going to get it. On Friday, April 25th, during the afternoon, David Early took a taxi to the Knight family home. The back door was unlocked, so he entered the house. Early started ransacking through the house for whatever he could find: money, jewelry, anything he might be able to sell or pawn. While searching Merrill and Regina's bedroom, Early found Merrill's .22 caliber rifle along with a box of shells. In that moment, he made the decision that what he had found so far wasn't enough and he needed more. He would just have to wait for his cousin to come home from work to get what he needed. David Early loaded the rifle and made his way back down to the living room, where he placed himself in Merrill's favorite chair and proceeded to smoke one cigarette after another while he waited for his cousin to come home. Regina was the first to arrive home that day. She walked inside her home only to find Early sitting in the living room with a .22 caliber rifle pointed directly at her. At gunpoint, Early forced Regina upstairs to hers and Merrill's bedroom, where he bound her hands and feet. Early told Regina that he needed money, and if she gave him some, he would leave and not hurt her. Regina told him that there was $60 in her purse, and he was welcome to it. Early retrieved the money and then told Regina that 60 wasn't enough. He needed more. Regina pleaded with Early to just let her go and she would try and find more money for him. But then Early heard Karen and Kenneth coming up the walk of the house. Early ran down the stairs and pointed the shotgun at the kids. Both Karen and Kenneth were taken by surprise to this man standing behind the door with a gun. They were absolutely frozen in fear. Early forced the two teens upstairs, the entire time pointing the rifle at their backs. He forced Karen into her own bedroom, where he tied her to the bed with nylons. He then forced Kenneth into his parents' bedroom. When Kenneth entered the room, he saw his stepmother bound with nylons and gagged on the bed. Early then tied Kenneth to the foot of the bed with nylons. Then Early went back downstairs to the main level of the house to wait for Merrill. Around 5:30, Merrill entered the house, only to see Early waiting for him with the loaded shotgun. Merrill raised his hands and asked Early why he was doing this, but Early was silent. He forced Merrill to climb the stairs to the second floor of the house and into a third bedroom. My thoughts are that this was most likely Kenneth's bedroom. Early ordered Merrill onto the floor of the bedroom and told him to tie his legs together with some nylons that Early tossed towards him. Once Merrill had tied his own feet together, Early instructed him to lie flat on his stomach on the floor. Merrill complied, the entire time telling Early that he would do whatever he wanted so long as his family was left unharmed. Early, for the most part, ignored Merrill's pleas. He bent down to grab Merrill's arms to bind them when he spotted Merrill's wallet in the back pocket of his pants. Early grabbed the wallet and discovered $127, which he took, and then carried on with binding Merrill's hands together behind his back. So now Early has a total of $187 that he has gotten out of both Merrill and Regina. And $187 in 1958 is almost $2,100 in today's money. So that would have been enough to give Early a good head start. But that wasn't enough for Early. He returned to Karen's room and, threatening her with the rifle, he demanded she give him whatever money she had. He then returned to Merrill and Regina's bedroom and did the same thing to Kenneth. Between the two kids, he was able to get another $77. He then told the family to be still and quiet. Early told them that if they all just stayed calm and quiet and didn't struggle or cause him any grief, he would leave the house when it got dark outside. But then, the doorbell to the Knight family home rang. The hostages and the criminal all took a small gasp. Through tears and fury, the four members of the Knight's family eyes were darting from side to side, hoping that whoever was at the door would find and save them. Early, still in Merrill and Regina's bedroom with Regina and Kenneth, stared at his two hostages and brought his finger to his lips. He then quickly and quietly went to the doors of the two other bedrooms and made the same gesture to Karen and Merrill. He then began making his way down to the front door of the house. On the outside of the front door of the Knight home stood a 47-year-old contractor, Varian Ashbaugh. The contractor had met earlier in the day with Merrill. Merrill was handling some contracts for Varian on a big construction deal. Merrill had asked Varian to mail or drop off some of the documents pertaining to the deal for him before the family left for their Vegas vacation. Varian had decided to stop by Merrill's home and just drop off the documents in person, as Varian Ashbaugh was also invited to the dinner party at the Wilsons' home that night. Varian rang the bell again, then tried the door when there was no answer. The door was open. He pushed it and entered the home. As he entered the foyer of the home, a young man came down the stairs from the second floor. The young man greeted Varian politely and asked if he could help him. Varian asked to speak with Merrill. The young man informed him that Merrill was currently in the bathtub, so that wouldn't be possible. Varian then asked if Regina was home. The young man smiled apologetically and stated that, unfortunately, Regina was busy. Varian had no reason to be suspicious of the young man standing in front of him. He just assumed that the Knights had hired someone to take care of their house while they were away on vacation. So Varian asked the young man if he could give an envelope to Merrill. The young man politely agreed and thanked Varian for stopping by. He then apologized again and began herding Varian to the door. Once Early had managed to get Varian out of the house, he made his way back up to the second floor to check on his hostages. But unbeknownst to Early, Merrill had been able to get himself free while Early was dealing with Varian at the front door. When Early stepped up on the second floor landing, Merrill lunged at him and began wrestling for the rifle. Early, who was resting his finger on the trigger of the rifle, simply began shooting as soon as he saw the figure coming towards him. Early shot Merrill 3 times. Merrill slumped to the ground. And now, nervous and angry Early decided that he couldn't leave any witnesses behind. The entire family had seen his face, and what if Merrill had told them that Early was related to them while he had been downstairs at the door? Early turned and entered Merrill and Regina's bedroom. He stepped over Kenneth, who was still tied to the foot of the bed, and shot Regina once in the head, killing her instantly. He then turned and stepped back over Kenneth and went into Karen's bedroom. There, he shot the 16-year-old once in the head, also killing her instantly. Early then turned to return to Merrill and Regina's room to take care of the boy, but in the few seconds that it had taken him to move from one bedroom to the next and kill Karen, Kenneth had been able to free himself from the nylon binds and run down the stairs and out the front door of the house. Early ran after Kenneth and was able to get one shot from the rifle off after the boy as he ran for his life. Thankfully, Early missed. But as Early began to aim the rifle for another shot, the rifle jammed. Kenneth ran straight to the home of the Wilson family, which was where the dinner party was being held. He ran straight inside the home and screamed, "Mother and father have been shot." Several of the men who were attending the party ran outside, just in time to see a car pulling away from the night home. 2 men, a William Pumpelly and Varian Ashbaugh, jumped into their cars to give chase. Between the 2 men, there was one empty rifle inside one of the cars, so they used the only weapon they had. They slammed their vehicles into the car that had left the night home until they were able to crash it into a ditch. Early jumped out of his car and began to run, but thankfully, William and Varian were able to overtake him, and they tackled him to the ground. They held Early in place using the empty shotgun as a threat until police could arrive. Shortly after William and Varian were able to catch Early, the rest of the men from the dinner party arrived, including Kenneth. Shortly after that, the police and a newspaper reporter arrived. Remember, this is taking place in 1958. Back then, news reporters were always inside a crime scene snapping pictures and asking criminals all sorts of questions while they sat at the scene in cuffs. Some reporters even used to hang out at the police stations and would either follow or just jump in the cruisers with the police as they were hurrying off to a crime scene. After receiving the story from Kenneth and the 2 men that gave chase to Early, the reporter walked over to Early, who was sitting on the ground, cuffed and smoking a cigarette, and asked him, "Why did you shoot that family?" Early took a drag off his cigarette and with a polite face answered calmly, "Because I needed money." The reporter asked him, "What for?" Still calm and polite as a cucumber. Are cucumbers polite? Well, they are now. Early, I just realized I wrote that. Still calm and polite as a cucumber, Early replied, "What does anyone need money for?" The police then took Early to the Arapahoe County Jail. But before the police took him inside, they stopped on the steps of the jail with their prisoner in true 50s detective movie fashion and held an impromptu press conference with their prisoner on display. They then took Early inside the jail and let him tell them what happened, which Early did just as calm as before. David Early had no qualms about what he had done or telling the police what he had done to the Knight family. An absolutely true psychopathic shit rat. The police then returned to the front steps of the station with their prisoner in tow and informed the waiting press in detail what Early had done to the Knight family. Early, with both hands in cuffs in front of his body, stood quietly and smoked a cigarette as the police officers detailed his crimes for the press. After the second impromptu press conference, Early was taken inside the station to his cell. There, a reporter from Littleton, Colorado, was set up and ready for a radio interview. Early sat down on his cot, lit a smoke, and proceeded to answer all of the reporter's questions and detail out his crime. David Early sat in jail until December 3rd of 1958. This was the final day of his trial, which I don't know why he had a trial if he confessed, but that's neither here nor there. It only took the jury 25 minutes to come back with a verdict of guilty of murdering the Knight family. The judge accepted the verdict and decided that he would sentence Early right away. David Early was sentenced to die in the gas chamber. Early spent the next 32 months in prison on death row while the state and the psychiatrists fought out whether he should be executed or committed, but eventually the state won and Early's execution was good to go. The date was set for August 11th, 1961. On August 11th, 1961, the warden went to Early's cell and read aloud the death warrant. Early was then taken out and guided up the ramp to the penthouse, where the hexagonal, we'll say hexagonal. If I'm wrong, you can write into the show and tell me that I'm right. Wait, I need some tea. If I'm wrong, write into the show and let me know. Where the hexagonal gas chamber was located. That's kind of creepy that they call it the penthouse. Whew. He was ordered to strip down and given prison-issued white shorts to wear inside the chamber. After he was seated and strapped into the steel chair, Early said out loud, "I'm sorry I did it." A Catholic priest administered last rites. His final statement was, "I hope God will forgive me." At 7:59, the door was sealed. 1 minute later, the sodium cyanide pellets dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid. As the room filled with white gas, Early tried to hold his breath. He lasted for about a minute, then compulsively took a deep breath and was unconscious within 10 seconds. At 8:05, his body was racked with convulsions, and then he was still for 2 minutes. He was pronounced dead at 8:07 p.m. And that, my friends, is the case of the Knight family murders. My thoughts. I searched and searched for any updates on Kenneth to see how he made out after that horrible crime and losing his family, but there were no records of him anywhere, which I now think is maybe a good thing. That poor boy deserved to have some privacy in his grief. We can only hope that he was able to overcome this horrific loss and do some good as he grew up. Meryl, Regina, and Karen are buried together in Fairmount Cemetery, Denver, Colorado. Personally, I believe that David Early had planned to kill whoever he came across that day. He obviously had no qualms about doing it. People in his way were merely seen as a curb to walk over and not give too much thought to it. I'm consistently drawn into the chilling intricacies of cases involving true psychopaths, and this one was no exception. What intrigues me is the stark, almost unsettling logical thought process that underpinned this crime. Driven by a need for money, Early identified a source and proceeded with a chilling directness to get what he needed. The most disturbing element of this crime lies in the cold, calculated elimination of witnesses. The need to ensure no witnesses led to this horrific murder of the entire family. There doesn't seem to be any hesitation or moral pause for repercussions of what he's about to do will have. Instead, Early methodically addressed each problem as it arose, treating human lives as mere inconveniences to be resolved in pursuit of a predetermined goal. This chillingly pragmatic problem solving is devoid of empathy or remorse, and it is a true hallmark of psychopathy. And that makes this case both terrifying and intellectually compelling. The Knight family murders is an excellent reminder of the importance of regularly calibrating our own moral compass. It is very easy to become complacent, to drift towards actions that, while perhaps not overtly malicious, subtly erode the social fabric that binds us. A periodic self-assessment, a thoughtful examination of our motivations and the consequences of our actions is crucial if we want to avoid that bitch we call karma. Whew. Chilling. And I feel so bad for Kenneth, who lost his entire family in one night because of $187. I did a nice short one this week. Even with this short one, I was still 2 days late getting it out. Ay, my life. Anyway, I hope you stay warm wherever you live. And I think that with that, we should leave it here for this week. Stay safe. Get your pap test done, and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.